Perfect. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Monique and I are both really excited to have this important talk today, and we could not be more honored to be in such great company. So what we're going to be talking about today is all things rum, more specifically, all things that are problematic in rum and how we can carve a healthy and productive path forward. So without further ado, let's maybe start with Monique. If you want to introduce yourself, then I'll introduce myself, and then we'll have all of you kind of give a quick background on what you do.
Perfect. Thanks, Céline. Hi, everyone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for logging on and looking at this roundtable today. We want to say thanks to all our panelists. I'm going to introduce one by one. And I am Monique Brackett. I am the Jamaican Rum Portfolio Ambassador for Campari America. The brands that I represent is Appleton Estate and Wray and Nephew White Overproof Rum. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk about this topic. What are we talking about today? So Céline and I, when we both submitted our topics, we were talking about similar things, and Tales of the Cocktails thought what would be a great way to combine the efforts and talk about one cohesive conversation. And so today we're talking about rum and being ready for its flowers, and how do we look at a new path forward? Because over the, over centuries, rum has had this, problematic history that tends to get a bit more highlighted than maybe we want to. And especially now with what's going forward in society, it's how do we speak to these categories of spirits, especially with rum, that do have that history. While we don't want to erase the past, we do also want to look at how best can we focus on the human aspect, the human resource, the heritage, and the progress that the category has made. So we put together this fantastic panel of different voices across different industries, and the adorers of rum. So I want to go ahead and start to introduce our panelists. First and foremost, again, I thank you all for spending this time with us. Your voice is much, much necessary. And so we thank you for joining us on the panel. So across the pond, I'll start with my friend, Ian Burrell. Everyone knows Ian. Hi, Ian, how are you in the UK?
Yeah, I'm fine, yeah. Thanks for having me on this panel. So you got the A team here, and I'm just like happy just to be with all you guys, just to learn and share. But yeah, thanks Monique for having me on the panel, and Céline, of course.
Yes, and we thank you, Ian, for joining us. We know you're 5 hours ahead, so we're going to make sure that we don't keep you too long, but as necessary.
Right, I've got some rum here, so that's all right.
Yes, and then next up, Ms. Jahdé Marley. We welcome you to the panel as well.
Hi, thank you, Monique and Céline. Thank you so much for putting this together. It's really great to be able to share space with you all and exchange some ideas to something that's just this challenging and really consumes a lot of my personal mental space. So it's really nice to be here. And I just also want to say that while we're really, going to be looking at the pathway forward, and that's going to be what we focus on today, it's really important to acknowledge the ancestors who really paved the way for this industry to be where it's at right now. Acknowledge that we stand on their shoulders collectively, all of us. So I really enjoy doing that from a place of joy and love and respect in my wine and spirits consultation and distribution work based in Brooklyn. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, Jahdé. And next, your partner in crime, Mr. Kelvin Uffré. How are you?
Hey, I'm Gucci. Yo, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. I'm Kelvin Uffré. I'm the spirit specialist for Winebow here in New York. Also, Sucio Sommelier. Y'all know the vibes. Y'all know the brand. Agüita Bendita. And I'm really excited to be here. Part of my daily work and practice is to bring the cultural fabric that spirits were not only created in, but what makes it more dynamic to enjoy them So talking about that cultural fabric and weaving that history, cultural history into the narrative of spirits is important. And that's acknowledging more dimensions than just the binary system of bad and good. Shout out to the Bronx, where I'm from. Hey, you know what it is.
Thank you, Kelvin. Yes, and your voice is much appreciated in this topic of conversation today. So thank you for joining us. Next up is Jen Akins, my sister across the country.
Hi, everybody. I can't believe that I get to be speaking with all of you. These are the most powerful voices in rum right now. And honestly, so I'm the general manager of Rumba in Seattle. We have over 700 rums. And my whole career has been based on education. And in that process, I have found that this is one of the most important topics that we need to be talking about as far as education goes. So I am so honored to be talking about this with all of these fantastic people. So thank you, Monique and Céline, for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us. I will say, I can't say this enough on this call, and I'll probably say it 1,000 times. The diversity of this panel, not just in nationality, but also in terms of the aspects that you bring to the category of rum, the areas of expertise, is much appreciated. You all have done something in your own rights to push this category forward and to change the conversations. And so today we're going to focus on that. We're going to focus on where we have been. As Jahdé said, it is historically something that I think has tainted this category over centuries. I don't know of another category that has gone through that type of rhetoric and judgment. And so I think it's really important that we talk about it in depth, and also to leave everyone at the end of this trying to understand how they can go back into their individual spaces and speak about rum intelligently and in adoration. And so that's what we're here to do today. And I hope for all of you all who are watching the panel that you also take the opportunity, where be it, reach out to these voices. If there's areas where there is maybe some anxiety of how to talk about rum or things like that, all of these individuals on this panel can assist in that going forward. So thank you again. So let's kick this off because we have 90 minutes and Céline and I have a lot of topics and a lot of questions to kick off. So I'll go ahead and kick it off, right, Céline? All right, so let's kick off and address the elephant in the room immediately. I don't believe in hiding things, and so let's address it. I am a child of the cloth when it comes to the Caribbean, the world of the Caribbean. Not all rums are made in the Caribbean, but a large majority are. And so as a person of Caribbean heritage, I grew up in a home where rum was very present. And it was also seen as a badge. It was seen as something we should be proud of because it comes from the islands that our parents hail from. A lot of us, our ancestors, our heritage, our medicinal, our celebration revolves around rum. And so when I came to the United States and I started to work in the industry here, and I would listen to the way rum was being perceived or spoken about, I was a little hurt. I was a little disappointed. And so a lot of it had to do with the history. And I just wanted to find a way in this conversation, how do we address that while maintaining the focus on the path forward? Kelvin, Ian, do you have any ideas?
It's on mute. Kelvin, you go first.
Roll, you want to roll?
I mean, for me, I love the fact that you focused on rum being part of the culture, your culture. I always like to, I've been doing talks and presentation on rums for about 25 years globally. And a lot of people marveled and smiled and laughed when I say to them that I had my first sip of rum when I was about 4 days old. according to my grandmother or my mum, depending on who was telling the story. One would put me to sleep, one would help me to sleep. So rum is in my DNA as a Jamaican. And it was always part of the family. It was always part of the culture. So I have always seen myself as a defender of the rum category, and always looking to try to protect it from all types of people that try to attack it from different parts of the world. So I come from it from a biased point of view in that respect. But although I'm saying that, I still see myself as a guest to the rum category, especially even more so today, because there's a lot of rums from the Caribbean, as you said, that are being made in the Caribbean basin. And it's for us to actually learn and understand a little bit more about these rums that are being made and how they're made and why they're made and what they represent. And because of the colonistic mentality from a lot of people that look at rum from the outside and then try to get inside, it does get looked down upon. It does get shunned. And we'll see this and hear about this throughout this conversation over the next hour and a bit, of how rum is belittled and taken advantage of as a category. And one of the main reasons for that is because it's made in so-called developing countries, developing nations, countries that were colonized. So that's probably the main reason why it's been looked down upon and seen as second to Scotch whiskey, to American whiskeys, to the French brandies of the world as such. And that's something that I've been trying to fight against for quite a few years, trying to raise the profile and the premiumization of rums. But it is a struggle. But when you have, as I say, talented people like we have on the panel now, and a lot more people that we could mention another 100 people that are voices and champions of rums, it is getting slightly better, but we still got a long way to go.
I agree. And, you know, it's funny, I just returned from St. Lucia, and I looked around at the people that were working at Chairman's Reserve in that area. And also what I realized, and this is not just a St. Lucia thing, this is most of the islands, the people that live in those areas are such generational families, and they have given back their blood, sweat, and tears to these brands. And so one of the things that I think we also have to keep in mind is that there is a alignment to the people that live in those countries. Mm. Kelvin, your background is from Dominican Republic, and
yeah, you know what it is.
Yeah, so tell me, in terms of acknowledging the history, especially from from the point of view of as a Caribbean person, how does that how do you align with that history and where the path forward goes?
Yeah, it's wild because I mean, shout out to the Domi, shout out to the Bodis, but like, you know, Dominican Republic shares an island with Haiti. So the whole island of Hispaniola is referred to by a lot of academics as the cradle of Blackness in the Caribbean. That island was a launch pad and a seed for Blackness throughout. So I was born there, you know, I grew up there for most of my life. I came here when I was 11 years old, spent time back and forth. And, you know, I want to start off by saying something that's going to coat everything I say afterwards in this panel like sweet, sweet, high-grade molasses. And that's, no one's free until everybody's free. You heard? No one's free until everybody's free. The other thing that I want to say is a remark, a question that I ask my allies. You know, I not only do not subscribe to the term decolonization unless you're a person of indigenous background who is actively colonized and your culture is being decimated through imperialism. So I don't subscribe to decolonization when you're talking about food, when you're talking about language. I just think that shit's corny. Ooh, sorry, I cursed. We're gonna edit that out though. I think it get kind of corny, and I think it get kind of self-righteous. So, you know what? The question I ask most allies, which is another term that I don't necessarily subscribe to, is what do you lose in privilege? What does privilege take away from you? Because privilege does take something from you on all levels. And what do you stand to gain from relinquishing it? And it's those two things. No one's free until everybody's free. And what does privilege erode in you? And what do you stand to gain in relinquishing it? Those two things pretty much inform my whole view on where rum should go, and the questions that I bring up, because I don't have the answers. I'm a Dominican immigrant, but every island has its complexity, its cultural complexity, its socioeconomic issues, its indigenous practices, its distillation practices. It is so fractured, but it's also so interwoven. It's important not to come at this like we have all the answers, but to really ask open-hearted, dynamic, informed questions. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have to create emergent strategies, because we're all sort of walking in the dark and in new terrain. So it's important to look at the past, so it informs a lot of our questions and our steps moving forward. As we move forward, what are some of the new things that we can create as we wander into a place that has no real roadmaps? Equity, labor laws, designation of origin, all this stuff is important. And I think we need to look at things on a dynamic level to really understand and move forward.
I agree. And I also want people that are watching the roundtable to understand they might be hearing us talk right now and think it's so high level. Whoa, what does this have to do with rum? It has everything to do with rum. It has everything to do with the category. As I said earlier, it's one of the categories of spirits that the history is always spoken about, whereas other categories like agave, the history that's spoken about there is so much more, there seems to be more admiration in it than anything else. And rum doesn't feel like that it gets that type of conversation or that kind of adoration. So I, like I said, coming into the category in the States, it was just mind-blowing for me, how different the conversations were. So thank you for your perspective.
I say one thing too, like, if we're not careful, it's important to look at the past, because if we're not careful, it's going to be white men in the sugarcane fields, you know, like the same way you see George Clooney now in the agave fields with that adventure narrative on a motorcycle. And now we see white men in you know, cornfields. You know, whiskey was a Black art form. Let's not forget that. And generationally, that history has turned to white guys in Oxford shirts standing in grain fields, and George Clooney riding his motorcycle through an agave field. And if we're not careful, you can't get it twisted. Like, it will get skewed that way if we don't fight for that equity. So I think part of the acknowledgement of history in rum is like, we're holding on to its Blackness, to its indigeneity. We want it represented, because to this point, the industry has not done a great job at telling those narratives.
Right. Yeah, a celebrity ambassador to a brand should not be the story behind the brand.
Not trying to see Ryan Gosling in a sugarcane field.
Right. Right.
I see Jahdé has her hand raised, so go ahead, Jahdé.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just really quick, you know, I was born here. I am of Jamaican descent. My father is a steadfast Rasta, and I was raised on roots reggae. So this idea of decolonization is kind of the word is just embedded in the way that I've kind of been programmed to think of all of this. But even more than that single word, I think the intent behind it, which I think I hope we can all agree on, which is like self-determination. The idea is to look at this conversation and not to go in with this savior ideology, but really to question what it means if we were to all pull out, if every industry that was not sustained within the Caribbean or within rum producing areas were to pull out, what happens then? What systems have been put in place and who has been empowered to make sure that the people are self-sufficient? And to me, that's really at the heart of this conversation. And just additionally, as we're talking about just acknowledging history, and Kelvin is just so spot on with just that flag. Like, if we don't preserve our contributions, the contributions of our ancestors, they will be erased. I think that it's important to really bring forth that you can't do like rum research just by researching rum. It is interwoven into the fabric of the Caribbean in a way that you just can't pull it out. And something that I really enjoy doing, especially since, you know, I grew up in the US with just this really romantic and nostalgic idea of home, frequenting and going back to visiting my family and whatnot is I read anthropological texts and they give me more about rum than any rum textbook has. I'm talking like vintage postcards from the African world by Jessica B. Harris, Dr. Jessica B. Harris, where she actually went through and collected postcards which photograph folks in the cane field and the dignity of their work. And there is no refuting that. Zora Neale Hurston has a beautiful book called Tell My Horse about life in Haiti and Jamaica and spirituality. When I say rum is on every couple of pages, it is. There's no pulling it away from the cultural fabric. So when we're speaking about acknowledging the history of rum, we're really speaking about acknowledging the history of an entire region and really focusing on the importance of keeping them coupled in conversation. Because once we start to pull it apart, it's that divide and conquer mentality where we can now compartmentalize. And this is too important to compartmentalize. It's connected to too much. So I just really wanted to say that because that's just how I try to approach speaking about these things that from the outside in are very dark, but from the inside out, we have no choice but to seek joy when sharing these stories, because these are the contributions of our people, you know?
Yep.
All that, Jahdé, all that and more, all that and more. Yes.
Thank you, Jahdé. And I always love the way you speak about rum. I think it's you're so poignant. And so it's just beautiful the way you speak about these issues. And I think that kind of, that really ties into something that Jen said. And in our last conversation, in our run through, about how words matter, and especially depending on from whom they come. And so between your words, Jahdé, and Jen's, reflection on that, and then Kelvin and his ideas of like what these words really mean, like decolonization and the term ally or allyship. I think it would be interesting to hear, Jen, your perspective on why words matter in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. We brought that conversation up when we were talking specifically about Clarin. And honestly, like even my growth within my understanding and education around the entire category of Clarin, because the way it was first presented to me was this very romanticized version of what was happening in Haiti, how it was made. And then it was also presented to me as Haitian moonshine, which to me, like, when you think about it, if you are being presented this super romanticized version of what this is, and someone's like, oh, it's like Haitian moonshine, everyone's making it in their backyard, it's so great. If you don't think beyond the words that are being said, you get this idea in your head, you're like, oh, how cool, like this inexpensive spirit that's just everyone's making, and some of it's good and some of it's not. And like, this is the good stuff that's being brought to this market. But if you take just one step deeper into that and starting to understand what those words mean and how that is going to affect every person that hears that, specifically for a new product being brought into the US market, especially when you're comparing it to something that has honestly not a lot of traction in the US. We don't use moonshine in much of anything. Nobody has a lot of respect for it. I personally don't think moonshine is a great thing. So when you're comparing something that is so beautiful and has been made so well by people for a very long time, it is something that has been passed down for generations. It's part of that community, that heritage of that country. It's just not a great way of describing it. It doesn't give it the credit that it should absolutely have. So, I talk to my staff all the time about the words that we use around rum in every aspect. For one thing, we don't use the word sweet in my bar. And when you start talking about rum, so few people know what's going on in the world of rum, and they have all of these preconceived ideas of what rum is, where it comes from, who's making it, all of these things, that when you start enforcing those ideas by using words like sweet, calling it Haitian moonshine, romanticizing how it's made, you're not allowing people to think beyond what isn't like what's just being presented to them. So to me, and honestly, Jahdé's conversation that she had very recently on her Instagram did a lot to affect the way that I think about Clarin as well. I'd already started this conversation in my own head about how we think about Clarin, and I had already had many issues with calling it moonshine, because the first time I tried it, I was like, this is nothing like moonshine. This is beautiful. This is exquisite. This is the fact that I can pour 3 different clarins for my guests and say, this is what we talk about when we talk about terroir and spirits. Like, you don't experience this very often. That is special. And that is not something that I feel is a likable comparison to moonshine, which is something that is, you know, unrefined, unaged. It's the crap, sorry for the word usage, but it's like the stuff that they don't put in the barrel. They don't think it's worth putting in a barrel to make into whiskey, like to bourbon, you know? So to me, that's one of the first conversations I have with my staff is like, what are the words that we're using around this? Because those words affect the way people think about rum in general. And like I said, education is key to all of this. And it starts from like the very minor things, the very small things, like utilizing the word sweet. We want people to think of rum as not Malibu, overly sweetened stuff, all of these things that people have in their heads about what rum is. It's not a liqueur. It's a very, very well-made spirit that has been made for centuries, for a very long time. It's delicious, it's beautiful. It's just what we have been exposed to is not what we all know rum to be. So if we can stop using the word sweet to get that out of their head, then we can stop using words like Haitian moonshine and, you know, like this is a rum for sipping and this is a rum for making cocktails and things like that. Like we just need to change the verbiage around it, because then as soon as people start respecting the spirit, you know, like Ian was talking about, like, why are people not respecting the spirit? Like, why? And so I think it really starts with those like small things, and just thinking about the words that we're using and how we're describing them. And then like looking inwards as to why we're using those words and why we're connecting with those words as well. And honestly, rum has provided me a lot of space for self-reflection and like what I am doing right, what I am doing wrong. And you know, that's honestly like one of the first things that I notice about myself is like, what are these words that I'm using? These words hold weight and they're important.
Jen, I wanted to ask you, so from a mixologist point of view, does the accreditation and the acclaim matter?
As far as like for myself, for my bar?
For the rum category, in terms of like the evaluation that takes place across spirits.
Honestly, I wish it didn't, but I think that it does, because I think especially in our market, people pay attention to that. And I think honestly, like those accreditations and awards and things like that are geared towards things like Scotch and bourbon. They're not geared towards other things, because even within our industry, there's a misunderstanding of rum in general. There's not a lot of, there's a lot of industry professionals that even I educate, because I'm like, we think about rum so much differently. It's such a broad category as far as how it's made, the way that it tastes, what it's supposed to be like, you know? And I think if you were to like try putting rum from Barbados and Clarin into the same competition, and it's like, you cannot do that. And I think that that's unfair to rum. And so again, we have to have people more educated. And if people can learn all the different regions of Scotland, they can learn all the different styles of rum that exist. It's just an unwillingness to learn. And I think, again, it goes back to what Ian said. Why are people unwilling to learn about this? I have so many people that come to me and they're like, I hate rum agricole. I'm like, why? Well, this one time I had cachaça and it was whatever. And I'm like, that's not, okay, let's start over. Let's start from the top. First of all, like, just because you've had poorly made anything, which is generally speaking, a lot of what we get in the United States, is we don't have a lot of importing of really quality spirits. Let me just show you what it can be like. And let me explain to you why it's made this way. A lot of people don't understand. They're like, oh, well, it's unaged. I don't like unaged rum. Why? Because you're a bourbon drinker. And so there's a lot of like these ideas in the US of like what makes a good spirit. I talk to people all the time when they're like, I want a dark rum. Do you want something that's old, or do you want something that has added color and sugar in it? What are you looking for? Because dark doesn't mean good and dark doesn't mean old. So again, with the words, you know, like all of these words are super important as far as like how we talk about rum and how we educate people. And honestly, like if I could go all over the country and just talk to people about how to talk about rum to other people, it would make my job a lot easier. And it's honestly my favorite part of my job. I love educating people about rum and showing them what it can be. So to answer your question, I think it's important, but before it can be important, we have to figure out how we're going to be judging these different styles of rum. We can't put all of these styles into one big umbrella category and judge them based on that.
And I agree. And that's the purpose for the question, because I look at the evaluation criterias for other spirits, and it just seems a bit more refined. And so I would love for the communities or the powers that be that do regulate and evaluate the rum category to take a deeper dive into it, and definitely start to look at the regional, the geographical, the terroir, and really dive down a bit deeper into it. Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to throw something in there because what Jen just highlighted a little bit, and this goes back to the language and how rums are categorized. What Jen was saying actually had a flashback in my mind. Some of these rums are caricatures of real rums. The rums that promoted and marketed as rum are caricatures, and it reminds me of all the old imagery you used to see when you saw people that are black in their faces and basically were trying to mimic people from the Caribbean or mimic what's called people, African Americans. And they were just caricatures. They were basically devaluating the realness of the people. And that's what just came to mind when you were talking about the mimicking of real rums with some of the products that are promoted and marketed as rums today.
Mm-hmm. And I think also it even wider than that, Ian, it would give individuals, like as someone who is always in Jamaica, when I go to the different resorts and the different hotels and you see the interaction with tourists and they try to educate, they stop short because they tell themselves, oh, these foreigners don't know what rum is, so I'm just going to throw this in the glass and give them what they think they want. And I think it would also go back to the origin and the places where rum is being made, that you would help those persons speak proudly about their particular rum on that island. People in Barbados that are adorers of Mount Gay want to talk about Mount Gay in a higher level. Trinidadians want to talk about Angostura rums at a higher level. We at Appleton Estate, Dr. Joy Spence travels all over the world speaking about the rums at a higher level. If we can get that conversation to progress, then you'll have a lot more education, as Jen is saying. But I think people have to kind of switch their minds on what the category is.
Totally. So Ian, when we talk about this caricature, it reminds me of something that we touched on in our last conversation, which was, the romanticism within rum and the fact that can be symptomatic of the white gaze at times, and people who are in charge of, telling the stories of rum when they don't really have a cultural connection, and sort of tending to romanticize the story a bit. We see that with a lot of brand stories and things like that. And so I think, how do we get around that? What do we do about that, whether with words or with, I guess just work, but like all of our work, how do we get around that?
First of all, as it was highlighted, the audience has to want to listen. They're gonna have to want to listen to the stories and have to want to listen to the information, want to listen to the facts and want to embrace it. As I start off by saying, I think there's a lot of people that get into rums, into creating brands or getting involved in the business that just use it as a way to make a quick buck, and they have no love really for the culture behind it. They don't really want to immerse themselves or learn about the actual culture behind rum. They just do it as a way of making a quick buck. That's why, Kelvin's mentioned tequila a couple of times. Look how many tequila brands are popping up from left, right, and center because people are just jumping over there and say, oh, I can make some money off of this culture and appropriate it. I think we're going to get into a bit later, but where is that line between appropriation and appreciation, as I like to say. But I know that Kelvin's got his hands up, and I know Jahdé had their hand up, and I want to hear from them, because I'm loving this, especially coming from a European or British Jamaican perspective, because the USA is the biggest rum drinkers in the world. And that is the market that me personally, I would love to be able to solve some of these questions. So I definitely want to hear from Kelvin and Jahdé on this.
Words do matter, and this is why I've stopped subscribing to the term decolonization. For me, there's too much abstraction around that term. You know what I'm saying? Once again, if you're an indigenous culture whose history and cultural fabric is being torn apart by imperialism, you have every right to use that term as a way to quite literally let people know what's happening and what your actionable terms are. But with rum, it creates a lot of questions because rum came from colonization. There was no indigenous distilling before that. It came from that cultural rupture. So I use the term BIPOC-centered. And that does help to solve the problems, the caricaturization, the fetishization of labor. Because if you're centering the BIPOC experience, which hasn't really been done all by the industry, the that have done it, don't get me wrong, great job within the span of time. If you can focus on being BIPOC-centered, even if you're a white American or a colonizer or whatever, you can keep that as a beacon and make your decisions surrounding centering the BIPOC experience of rum. And I think that Black and Brown and Indigenous contributions can be honored as such. So for me, we need clear roadmaps. So words are important, but the words also have to create a concrete roadmap, or else people are gonna be like, let's decolonize food. And I'm not giving up rice and peas. I'm not trying to eat boiled cabbage. I said this last time, like people are like, let's decolonize food. I'm like, I'm not giving up mango and mofongo, you bugging. Like, let's decolonize language, but we're gonna do it in English. Like there's a lot of like, it's a great battle cry. And I think it's a great entry point to think about things more dynamically. But overall, I don't think it represents the equity and the representation that we're seeking within the category. Me and Jahdé have had a couple rums, and we talk about this. So I would love to hear Jahdé say it too, because me and Jah also co-founded IBC with myself and her partner, Keegan Joseph. Shout out to Spirit Band. I gotta do it, that's my man's. Shout out to Keegan Joseph, he's the best. He's a brother. We've had many conversations, and the beauty of the conversations we have is that they're quite open-ended. And every time we approach it, the dimension changes a little bit. Some more insight over here. And that's the thing, rum is a category with so much discovery attached to it, you know? And I'm not talking about like adventure colonizer discoverer. There's so much narrative that has not been brought to light yet. There's so many manuscripts from not only indigenous populations, but the enslaved that are giving us insight as to the ways they had to transform intimacy, their own freedom, their own way of commerce, their spirituality in the cultural rupture of colonization. All that, to Jahdé's point, is attached to rum as well, interwoven completely. So BIPOC centered, yeah, y'all heard, y'all know what it is. Susio sounds, BIPOC.
I love that, BIPOC center.
But Kelvin and Jahdé, I mean, I know IBC definitely focuses on a lot of the topic we're talking on, but what about what's already established? How is that going to be, how's that going to be refined? How's that going to be reestablished? Because you've got cancel culture happening now. How do the brands that are already established, that have obviously have some that negative past, how do they go back and turn the tide?
Thanks for the alley-oop, Monique. So really though, I think that like you have brands who are there to make money, and then you have individuals that are attached to morality. And I think at the top of this, we have to stop equating people with brands because they are not the same thing. For instance, I might be able to plug a brand today that I think is doing really good, but tomorrow, if one of their partners were outed as problematic, how do they respond to that? Probably in a way where they are going to protect their bank accounts. It's capitalism, it's what it is. So I think it's really important when looking at industry that we stop treating these brands as if they are people. We stop personifying brands. Shout out to Maggie Campbell, who is just very vocal in this, and who I've discussed, this topic with at length. And kind of to that point, with IBC, the Ideal Bartender Collective, we really came together from frustration and feeling like we were in a vacuum with the way that we were approaching and thinking about rum. And we quickly learned that we sync up on quite a few things. And it's been therapeutic and also just has filled me personally with purpose, just being able to share space with Kelvin and Keegan in that way. And I say that to say one of the ways that companies can, rectify some of the shit, for lack of a better word, is fund Black and Brown ran organizations. There's money. You have to part with some of the funds. Fawn Weaver is doing excellent work in the whiskey world with her distiller incubation program. We could make room for that, in the rum world as well. And somebody mentioned, I think it was Monique earlier on, about how the communities surrounding distilleries go on for generations. Very few people just move up and choose to, be in the cane fields and to take place in the distillery. This is a familial work. It's passed down. So if we're looking for a pathway to reparations, I mean, that is one that really stands out to me. And just something else that has just been at the top of my head, and I really thank Kelvin for kind of orienting the way that I think about this, is we tend to speak about rum in a very high level way. The way we discuss rum, we are speaking about aging, and we're speaking about some of the more romantic and esoteric aspects of rum. But kind of to Jen's point about moonshine, I think we have to be careful with poo-pooing on moonshine, because that really is coming from a space of the people who were not allowed to distill and make alcohol in the daylight. They had to make it under the light of the moon in very inhospitable places. So if we kind of backtrack a little bit and speak about Clarin, that's exactly how Clarin was kind of, how it made its way into the rum category, which is liberation, which is resistance, which is the need for ceremonial libation. So while I understand that we are not talking about a crude product by any means, I think that we have to kind of be careful with identifying words that have kind of been bastardized and taken away from their root, which is really erasing the people who were so innovative and were able to achieve so much with so little. So all that to say, that's what we talk about at IBC. If you're looking for somebody to fund, you can fund us.
Don't forget to put the website, what's called, at the end of this.
Oh, and can I say, it's so ironic. We're having this conversation, and I want to wish everybody out there happy Emancipation Day, because it is a globally recognized day, especially in the Caribbean. So today is Emancipation Day for Black and Brown countries that fought for their independence and fought with all their lives. So.
Excellent.
Yo, the Moonshiners Association is gonna drag you, Jen.
Oh, I just wanted to say
they're
that
gonna cancel you. The Moonshiners National Association is gonna find and drag you. Watch, yo.
This is a prime example. This is a prime example of what I'm talking about, where we have to listen and learn all the time, because here's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from Seattle, where when I first moved here, moonshine was all the rage because everyone was making local spirits in order and waiting to age it to release bourbon, but didn't want to wait to make money. And so everyone was releasing moonshine. And so that's kind of, we have to think beyond our very limited perspective. Absolutely. And I was raised in rural Kansas. My father's from Tennessee. He comes from a long line, so he says, of moonshiners. So, and I have friends that come from long lines of moonshiners. And so I have a very small bubble of perspective when it comes to a lot of things. So this is important. You have to reach beyond what your personal perspective and experience is. And that is a fantastic point. And thank you, Jahdé, which is why I'm so excited to be here with you, listening to you right now. So.
In fact, we could be doing a session just on what's going on true spiritual Moonshine from the Caribbean, if we start talking about Jankrabati from Jamaica, with Babash from Trinidad, you got Hammond from St. Kitts, you have Pitoro as well. So right across the Caribbean, it has been part of our culture to make our spirits, because it's been part of the spirits. It's been passed down from when we were enslaved and brought over from what's called Africa, where we were using palm wines at that time as part of that spiritual process. So the rums were available, the rums were there because our colonizers were telling us to actually drink that and use that. So it then became part of the process. I love telling stories of using Jamaica rum to pour a little bit on the doorsteps or the foundations of a house when you build a house or you move into a house, to get rid of the doppies, the ghosts, as such. And when I explained that to people that they're wow, that's just amazing. I'm like, because rum is more than a spirit, it's a way of life. In the Caribbean, it's not something we just drink, or you want to just get drunk, or you want to throw lots of stuff inside it. It is part of our culture. And when I do say that I got a little cross in my head with a little bit of rum when I was very young, that's true. It did happen because it was part of my culture and heritage. So yeah, I 100% agree with Jahdé in regards to it is that DNA of that word has been bastardized in some ways when it comes to America, but when it's ours in the Caribbean, if we bring that narrative and make sure we hire IBC, if we use that narrative to educate people to understand what it means to us and what it means to rum, they'll have a better idea and a better understanding, a better appreciation of that raw essence, that raw material.
Yes.
Now I just want to drink moonshine. So that's it.
So Ian, you and I have had a conversation already about this, and I think this kind of stems off of that last conversation. What took place in the UK where rum became a bit more refined in stature that we here in the United States could probably adapt, if not adapt, maybe look at it in a different view, because we are a huge bourbon culture here. Mm-hmm. What took place in the UK that we can look at further? I
wouldn't say it's a tough question. There's lots of different layers in the answer. You will have to go back to history and look at where the cane spirit that we define and call rum, where that has come from. Now, most of the historians would say that, yes, it's Barbados gave rum its name. The English had gone to the island. They were making their spirits, and they were influenced by other spirits in Europe and things like that. And that became a commodity that they were using to make money, whether you were a landlord, mortgage broker, you were an enslaver, you built up your money, you built up your wealth on the facts of the land, and rum was part of that. So that was ingrained in British culture, and it's still ingrained in British culture today. Yesterday, the country was celebrating Black Tots Day. Now, Black Tot was the day when the rum ration was last given to the British Royal Navy, July the 31st, 1970. Up until then, rum was given as part of a ration. So all of the sailors there, so they were drinking rums because the British felt it was theirs. They called it theirs. It was the British style. It was taking rums from the various different colonies to blend in England, or blend in various different ports to give as part of your rations. So it became part of the psyche, that culture. But because it became some of that culture and they wanted to make more money from it, they just sold it either cheaply, they put lots of caramel, lots of color inside there. And it was only, I would say, in the last 20 years where rum has started to rise in the mindset that it could be seen like a Scotch in Europe. And even then, and that was, and I know you work for the company, but Appleton has been one of those companies that have been pushing that narrative over here in the UK. So it's changing people's mindset on how they saw a spirit that they thought that was theirs. They thought it was their own. They stole it, but they thought it was their own. And that's the difference I see here in the UK and in America. In America, rum was the drink. But then when the Americans and the British had that little tiny disagreement, and the Americans said, "Oh, we ain't drinking that British crap anymore. We're going to drink our own shit," and then started drinking American whiskeys, and the sales of rum started going down. But there was a time where rums was as popular, if not as popular, even more popular in the Americas during the 17th century and 18th centuries at that particular time, because it was the spirit of choice. But it started getting devalued, and today we can even throw in other things like unfair trading. There's a lot of unfair trading at the moment, especially with the Caribbean. I'm very passionate about the Caribbean, especially being able to have a level playing field. We can't even have a level playing field with rums into the United States of America because of a tax that basically says that any rum that's sold in America, then $1 of that has to go to 2 islands. Yeah, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands get money from all the rum from the Caribbean that gets sold into the Americas, as well as their own rum. So they have an unfair advantage there. So Caribbean rums can't even be sold in the US with a level playing field because of an old law just to try to raise money and make money for the rich. So in the UK, it's slightly perceived differently as such. But again, as I said, the USA is the biggest buyers of rum in the world, drinkers of rum in the world. And until we get a level playing field there, then we're always going to have an uphill battle. But we're fearless. We're fearless. As I like to say, we're little but we're taliwa. We're small, but
that's right.
We're little but we're taliwa. We punch higher than the stance that we're looked at. So rum will have its day. Rum will have its day. Premium rums and good rums and quality rums will have its day inside countries or areas like the USA.
Yes.
Hopefully that answered the question, because I was going all over the place there.
No, wonderful.
So, Kelvin, I think you have thoughts on this as well. If you'd like to segue, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I mean, me and Ian during the run through talked a little bit about this, the whole GI conversation, and I think with all of the laws that are getting placed and worked on now, so that rum can have a designation, so that there is a standard for what production looks like and transparency. I think that's great on that end of on the spectrum. But for me, I also think it's important that people throw the fucking word away. Wow. I don't think it's the only solution to make GIs. This is what needs to happen. I think people should also consider declassifying their cane distillates. We've seen this in mezcal, where the CRM and the CRT for tequila have created certain laws which exclude certain indigenous practices, a certain socioeconomic level of distillers, moonshiners in Mexico. So they've been making distillados de agave. They're like, we're just gonna declassify our distillates so that the parts per million of our methanol could be what we've been doing for 200 years, 100 years. So that we can use a wooden tree trunk as a still, and so on and so forth. So I think with the declassification of cane distillates, I mean, we've seen similar things happen in Claden, where Claden was really wild and free, and certain companies have gone there to create laws, to create commerce. And I think it's important to have both ends of the spectrum and the gradient in between. We have to stop thinking about things as a binary system of bad, good, laws, no laws. There's a whole world in between that we have no access to if we don't have both ends of the spectrum. The strict laws that we need to protect our people, labor laws, our people from capitalist slavery, and then the declassification of people to just run wild with it. And in between, you have this beautiful gradient that once we have access to that, gives us much more possibilities, much more ways to protect people, much more styles of distilling, much more stories and narratives that are often left out when there's only one system, one story being told. When people say decolonize or BIPOC centered, the colonizer gaze is dangerous. It isn't just, I'm gonna go colonize and discover, and I'm gonna call my company the Sons of Columbus because it's a point of pride for us. If you call yourself the Sons of Columbus, there are dynamics and systems within that history which are quite brutal, which you will perpetuate because you are fetishizing a history with only one perspective, the perspective of triumph, of imperialism. So you leave the subjugation of people, use of people. I often say they dropped the whip, but they picked up the dollar. Yeah. Gotta understand, capitalist slavery is real, especially in rum producing countries. You know, so how do you address that without blanketing it with American slavery? How do you address those issues? So when we say decolonize and make it BIPOC centered, we are trying to address some of the ills that come with having that perspective. And that perspective exists on a spectrum as well. From the white-owned bar that, you know, plays reggae and it's only a bunch of white boys in the back pouring rum. I drink it too. It's all, it's, you know what I'm saying? No judgment. To the companies who go into these countries and, you know, allegedly sexually abuse young women and take part in the sexual slavery as well of young women, because the power is a motherfucker. It warps your sense of reality, your sense of time, and your sense of privilege. So it's important to know how privilege drowns you, because that's one of the aspects of the colonizer gaze, which is dangerous. And if you're not self-aware, you can address those issues. When you make a brand, all of those things will be in it because you can't see it. That's important. You know, it's important to look at that. So I went on the rant, but my bad. Yeah.
No, and Kelvin, as much as I want the designation to take place, I'm also looking at the countries that those designations have to take place in. You're talking about, like you said, a lot of countries are having to pay Peter, rob Peter to pay Paul, right? That's a very common term we use in the Caribbean. Many of those, I won't say exact countries, but many of those countries are still paying back hundreds of decades of debts to certain countries. And so when you talk about designation on a category like rum, it's another way to create this overarching taxing system that does not benefit the folks on the ground, right? And so I think it's very important as people look, and then you're talking about a category such as rum, where rum is produced globally. So you're asking every single region to create these DOs and these GIs. Right now, Jamaica is working on their GI, but when will Barbados, when will Trinidad, when will the Philippines? And so I think overall, it's very splintered. And for the category, everybody kind of has to come together to understand how do you create a level playing field for third world nations to not be subjected to the corruption that takes place in the rum category. So I appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, they make Claren in DR. We grew up drinking it. I grew up getting the cross too, a little bit of Claren, just a little still, right? Mm-hmm. Also, it's so beautiful to hear Ian talk about that, because on the other end in DR, you know, we have our own voodoo traditions rooted in voodoo, 21 Divisione. We have our own Lua, very similar spirituality. So pouring the rum on the door and all that stuff is stuff that I grew up with as well. So it just demonstrates how interwoven our cultures are, and that's a beautiful thing. And that also includes European countries and colonizers. We're all interwoven in this. But I just found that so beautiful. Part of the thing that happens in DR is like on the news, 8 people died from drinking this hooch that was loaded with methanol, and right. that happens. But there's also a lot of propaganda to stop small distilleries from popping up. And how do we protect those people who grew up in batés, and in batés they make their Claren and that's what they use? And how do we protect them? It serves these big companies not to, because then it allows them to subjugate them into the system. Right. So to your point, it's like, it's a very complex system, you know.
Yes, yeah.
And Jahdé, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes. Especially with the DOs and you know, Kelvin touched on something that I think is really important, which is taking scale into account. I work primarily in the natural wine world, where we are having our own issues with labor and designations and labor laws and certifications and all of these things. And something that I've really noticed, and I see a lot of parallels in the wine world as well, are that these designations really can be used as a tool to help the people on the ground when they are applied to larger corporations that are outside entities that are now present on the island and really have the majority of control and power along the supply chain. We can get as creative with these designations and as specific with these designations as we'd like. This is a very young category. They haven't been established yet. Who's to say that we cannot put labor, pay, quality of life regulations in these DOs that really it benefits these larger companies to use. And on a lot of islands, it's the larger corporations that have a monopoly on the stills. You don't see small rum producers really coming out of Jamaica. You see a lot of negociants, you see a lot of merchants, but you have X amount of distilleries, and that's where the rum comes from. If these distilleries are regulated, you know, Jamaica is kind of a poor example because they do have the unionized sugar cutters, just super progressive, but this is the kind of mentality that can be enforced. These are the kinds of regulations that can be enforced through a DO. And then furthermore, it makes the islands that have smaller distilleries stand out. And we can have a conversation about what it looks like to have self-sufficient, sustainable distilleries, small distilleries on these islands that aren't just pushing out rum, because within the rum conversation, I mean, cocktail culture is at the center of it. I mean, we have a whole conversation with Tiki versus Tropical, which I'm sure you're going to have a whole other panel on, but all that to say, a lot of these liqueurs, a lot of these tropical flavors aren't even made in the Caribbean. They're outsourced. They're taking fruits, shipping it somewhere else, having it made there. A lot of commerce, a lot of money being generated by this. And it also doesn't make its way back to the islands. Because, you know, Ian really brought up a point about rum being huge in the Americas before the Revolutionary War, but also rum had its day during Prohibition. People were flying out to the Caribbean, having rum, having fresh fruit, and that's bang, boom, we got cocktails. So why is it that this revenue stream is also not benefiting the people on the ground, the people who have been stewards of this land and who have been growing mango trees for generations? I think that's a really important part of this conversation as we talk about self-determination and as we speak about being BIPOC centered. It's not just rum. We have so many other micro industries that are seated around the rum industries. This is a multi-billion-dollar machine. We got to find a way to splinter some of this off. And I think a big part of that could be using the DO as a way to kind of have these larger corporations just, you know, pay up and pay it forward.
Thank you.
That works for one of those corporations. I can say what we have done over, especially because for us, the driving force is Dr. Spence and her getting her say in what takes place as far as the Jamaican subcategory. And so as I don't claim to represent the entire corporation, the entire Campari group, but what I will say is we have been mindful of the fact that we are marketing. We are not Appleton Estate. And that's very important. Appleton Estate are the people of Jamaica. Appleton Estate, Ray and nephew are the people of Jamaica. You land in Jamaica, you know Ray and nephew. You know more Ray and nephew than you know Appleton Estate. And so we want to make sure that that is widely clear. And that leads me to my next question, because we are in cancel culture. How do we focus on calling these corporations in versus calling them out?
We have to address fragility first, and also the fear of being first. I'm not going to call any names because we've already been warned against that, but I know Kelvin has reached out to quite a few people like, yo, I know how to do research. I'm a monster on this Google thing and I see your lineage. It's not clean. So what do you intend on doing that? And straight have my man left on red. So with a call in like that, which is just so clear cut, you don't have to think. The answer, the solution is right in front of you. If that doesn't work, I don't know what kind of calling in is going to, because if that would have been blasted and went viral on social media, we would have gotten a response by now. So, I mean, I just, this call in versus calling out thing, it's like, we just need to get results. And if you are not answering a text message, if I'm texting you saying that there's an issue and your decision is to block me on Instagram so that I can't blow your shit up in public, I should have just blew your shit up in public from the start. So I think that there's a little bit of accountability that needs to go on with the people who are, you know, the supposed subjects of cancel culture, and accepting a call-in as a gift when it's presented.
Jen?
Yeah, as somebody who obviously I buy a lot of rum, I curate our rum selection, and I talk a lot about, you know, buying ethically and, you know, putting money where my mouth is, trying to find transparency in brands, trying to support good brands. I'm not gonna lie when I say that, you know, a lot of the rums on my shelf, I don't totally know, like there's not a lot of transparency. And, you know, there have been some very, very recent brands that have come out as, you know, very not ethical in a lot of ways. And it's really hard as somebody who, you know, works for someone else that also is in charge of curating and buying, when I have a lot of this product, and I have definitely pulled products from my shelf. And to me, that is a step. It is the first step. You know, and recently before pulling products, I have had conversations with these people telling them that I am going to pull their products. And it's not, for me, it's not like I want to prevent this company from ever doing anything again. At least that's the step right now, the first step. I want them to learn and grow, because as we discussed earlier, you know, like, just because this company has done some great things, meaning like bringing certain things into market for the US to discover and things like that, doesn't mean that they can't be held accountable for anything else that they do now. And that's kind of where we're at with a lot of companies, where it's like, okay, great, you've done this great thing, this wonderful thing. We all now know about this wonderful category. We're all learning about it. We're all growing. Now you've done this bad thing, and now you have to fix that. And I'm with Jahdé. Like, if we call you and ask for results and answers in a way that is professional and not calling out, not canceling any of those things, we're just saying, hey, we found this information. We want answers for this information. What are you going to do? We want answers. We want solutions. We don't just want to hear why you did it. We want to hear what you're going to do about it now. And there is no response. I can only imagine that I would just want to blast that person at that point. To me, it's a multi-step process, you know, like with anything, if you don't get results the first time, you kind of have to move on to the next step. And so for me, it's, you know, pulling brands off my shelf. A lot of bars did this with Nicaraguan rum. We saw that years ago, and that had at least a small effect. You know, there have been things put in place to protect the sugarcane workers in Nicaragua, at least last I read. And so, you know, we know that as buyers, we do have some control and some power over things like that. And we can make changes with what we support, what we buy, what we, you know, present to guests. Like I said last time, you know, I see so many people and I introduce them to so many things. And if we are all introducing people to the things that we know that we can support, and, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with my guests and with other bartenders about the products that I've pulled. And a lot of times they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I'm going to go do more reading about that. You know, I want to educate myself. I want to learn about all of these things and what's happening. I think that that's really important. Conversation first, and then more action later. So I think as buyers, we have to just be really conscious of that and supporting brands that are doing things right. And when they're not doing things right, and I'm not saying like they've done one thing right and then they do something bad, that's still something that they've done that I can't support. So I've put brands on my shelf, and I think Jahdé said this earlier, actually, where, you know, like today I could support this brand, tomorrow something could happen. And I could learn something. And that's honestly, like, we should all be paying attention to that in every spirits category, but especially in rum is, you know, things change daily, and everyone needs to be held accountable, and everyone needs to be ready to accept that they've done something wrong and to acknowledge that. I don't think anybody wants to just tell somebody, okay, I'm done with you. I think we want people to grow. You know, we want everyone to be better. We want everyone to learn. We want this category to grow. So we want the people involved to learn and grow and just be better. So that's kind of where I stand in the whole thing, is how can I, just me by myself with this bar, encourage people to be better.
I love that. All right, well, we have about 15 minutes left here. And I think I'd like to open up to each one of the panelists your final thoughts and your productive, healthy way forward on how we can contribute in our own ways on uplifting and creating a more equitable category is the rum category that we all love.
Well, I'd like to throw in the States, if I was launching a brand or getting involved in a rum, because if I was not from that particular culture and I wanted to launch a brand, rum, let's say if I was let's say I was a famous actor, you know, celebrity of such, and I wanted to open up a brand, and I heard some really fanciful name, and I said, oh, party, oh yeah, I'm gonna call my brand that party.
Yeah.
What needs to be happening is they need to be calling people like Kelvin and Jahdé and the IBC. That's what they need to be doing. We need to be getting agencies and companies like that to educate them on the foundation of where rum has come from before you even think about getting your brand out there. And you won't have mistakes. You won't have crazy products that come out there where it is not appreciation, it is exploitation and appropriation of another culture. I mean, I know we're not mentioning any brands or anything like that, but when that story came about, and I actually was privy to part of that beforehand, because they were asking me questions about certain things, but didn't actually let me know what was going on. Someone came up and said to me, well, it doesn't matter anyway. It was a black man, and he's what's called representing a black country. I'm like, what? Are you serious? Are you serious? No, just because you are one color, it doesn't mean you can't appropriate another culture in that respect, especially when it comes to rum. So just because we are, I use we as the Caribbean basin, just because we are the makers of the best spirit in the world. I am biased, yes, rum is the best spirit in the world. It doesn't mean it can be just taken just taken lightly by anyone, regardless if you're black or white. It can't be taken lightly at all. We are at a stage now where we are asking questions. People want to know the answers. We are in this internet world where you can click and Google and certain things and find out certain bits of information, which would then provoke a conversation. But seriously, I mean, one of the things I've taken away from here is if you're watching this retrospectively, and you are looking to get involved in the rum business in the US, you need to be speaking to at least two of these guys here. Because that is going to save a lot of brands. And I know Céline understands this, because she was passionately, angrily talking about a brand recently where some guy came on Indiana Jones hat and talking about how he was in the jungle and all this, and that's the reason why he created his brand. No. If he did the research, did the work, if he'd contacted, say it again, IBC. I'm just making sure we say explain, because anyone was watching this. If it contacted you guys, that guy would have come to market with a better product, because I tell you, that's going to be shot down. And I'm not actually going to shoot it down maybe after a phone call, and he doesn't return my phone call, or if someone else makes the phone call, doesn't get back to you. But what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of work to be done in actually bringing rum to the forefront, bringing rum to the level we want to be. But there's still a lot of charlatans out there, and they have to be, going back to what we said, they have to be called in and then called out if they're not going to what's called play by the game, play by the rules. We're tired of rum being taken advantage of, and I want to see more premium rums out there that are part of the culture that's bringing money back into the economy. I mean, just to finish up, I remember the only brand I've ever worked for, because I created my own job. I said building my own table. The only brand I've ever worked for was Appleton, and that was in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that was because, yes, I was a Jamaican as a bartender, and they felt, oh, it'd be a really good idea to have a bartender talk to other bartenders. So I was also the first brand ambassador here in the UK, especially for rums. And one of the biggest passion I had, the biggest pride, the thing that made me really passionate about it was I knew every time I went into a West End, a high class bar, that had like dark gold and white rum, because that's what it was categorized back then. And I brought Appleton to the table and they tasted it and they said, oh, this is good. Are you sure this is rum? Yes, it is rum. And they finally took it. I knew that was money going back to my country because my uncle worked as a security guard at the Appleton estate. And I knew money was going back to my country because I was getting someone to drink a Jamaican rum, a rum as such. So that's what I want to see. That's why I continued in this game, as well as loving the industry. I love this industry, and now I've got families. I know Kelvin's going to be looking after me when I'm in New York next week, and I hope Jahdé is there as well. And I will get to Seattle and Celine's birthday as well. And Monique, yeah, we're there, brothers and sisters. Yeah, man. But I just want to see the rum category prosper in as much possible as possible, but not taken advantage of. And when you've got gatekeepers like we have here, seriously, if you want to get into this game and you're looking to half step, then you're in trouble, because now we are at a stage where we are calling people out and actually bringing it to the forefront. And you're going to waste a lot of money trying to just exploit and take advantage of our industry. That's just my little piece.
Yes. Jahdé, your final thoughts?
Yeah, shout out Equiano and 10 to 1 just at the top. I don't think we've done that yet because, I mean, just, yes, the work and representation is so important because we have to, understand that just, when we speak about Caribbean owned products, that doesn't always mean Black owned, and just really big deal that we now have 2 to speak of. So just congrats on that. And just additionally, Ian, you mentioned this earlier on, which is that the US is the biggest rum consuming country in the world. And something that I just want to plug real quick as an extension of IBC that I've been working on is something called Sugar and Spiced. I not only want to get folks of Caribbean descent down to reconnect with their roots via rum, via food, via distillery tours, but I think it's really important that we bring some folks up from the islands up into these very influential markets in order for them to connect not only with the end consumer, but with bartenders, with tastemakers, really actually get to have conversations with people rather than consistently having to go through a proxy. So again, if you are looking for things to support or ways to just kind of disrupt what's already been laid out, things are in the works and, constantly being formulated. So I just think it's important that we acknowledge the people on the ground in every step of this as well.
Thank you, Jahdé. Final thoughts, Kelvin?
Yeah, I gotta say, Ian, thank you so much for your support. I tell you, I got your poster in my bedroom right next to Drake. It's Drake, and then it's Ian Burrell, and I got like a little Michael Jordan poster too. Like, you're the homie, you're an inspiration, and at a time when rum wasn't what it is now, you're one of the few Black men, Jamaican men, paving the way for guys like myself, for men of color, for women of color. So I just want to say shout out to you. That's big deal, big energy. So when you come out here, we're gonna drink so much champagne, it's gonna be crazy.
What? Fizzy grape juice?
I mean, rum. Oh, sorry.
No, not the fizzy grape juice.
It's gonna lose my number. It's gonna drop my friend request. So no, I think, my final thoughts are, we need to begin to see each other more dynamically. We need to have these conversations about, because white people are not just white people.
Correct.
When we talk about the colonizer versus the enslaved, we need to start to see each other. We need to start to build compassion for each other, because othering is just blanketing white people is just white people on the other end of the spectrum. You have othering here and you have their colonizers here. And that doesn't leave room for the gradient I love so much, the complexities I love so much. So we need to build compassion so we can see each other and have these conversations. On the other side of that, sometimes you gotta load the Draco. Sometimes somebody gotta get punched in the face. That's an important tool. Just like cancel culture is an important tool, just like having roundtable discussions are important tools. You should learn to use more tools than just canceling, than just knocking somebody the fuck out, than just talking, intellectualizing. There needs to be more room and spaces where multiple tools can be used, respected, and used dynamically. Because cancel culture is great, but if that's all you do, you'll look back in a few years and it's gonna be a stain in a lot of culture. We'll look back with perspective and say, wow, we canceled that person, great, but that didn't leave any room for dialogue. I don't think anybody's beyond redemption. Everybody should have the opportunity to redeem themselves, to be held accountable, and to drink some fucking rum.
Yeah, man.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah. Agree. And last but definitely not least, Jen Akins, your final thoughts.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me. It has been incredible talking to all of you. I look forward to meeting all of you and having some of these conversations over some rum really soon. For me, it's just, I don't know, like it's all about conversations. It's all about educating my guests, educating my staff, and not just blindly buying and not thinking about where things are coming from. You know, a big part of my job obviously is bringing new spirits, new rums into my bar. And one thing that I really wanted to focus on is looking beyond that brand ambassador, beyond that rep, and really kind of like doing deep dives into what I'm bringing in. And then also acknowledging that, you know, when we kind of gloss over a lot of those things, we're losing a lot of history. And that is such an important part of rum, especially. And honestly, like something I've noticed is my guests love the history. They love the stories. They love the connection. And I think that we are doing ourselves a huge disservice when we are lacking that. Like, prime example, you know, I'm coming from a very limited perspective when it comes to moonshine, to take back to that. And then to listen to Ian and Kelvin talk about what moonshine means to them, you know, like my limited knowledge or experience limited me from hearing those stories. And those stories are beautiful, you know, like that's such a beautiful thing to hear. And so for me, I want everyone to listen and to kind of like let go of your small bubble of information and your experiences, so that you can start experiencing what everyone else has to offer, especially in the world of rum. So, you know, those stories are super crucial, and it's a big part of how I sell rum, honestly. So I love to hear things like that.
Yeah, man.
And
Excellent.
This was so enlightening, and again, I know I can speak for both me and Monique when I say that we're absolutely honored to have you all participate in this conversation. So thank you once again.
yes. Thank you to my co-moderator, Céline, for also coming to the table together to put together this lovely roundtable. Thank you for the opportunity from the Tales of the Cocktail organization. We really appreciate this because, let's be real, it's controversial, but just to be able to want to have that conversation is a step in the right direction. I want to thank the company I work for allowing me to have this conversation, because it could be seen as a bit, you know, a little bit counterproductive to our brands. But I thank you for the confidence that we would put together such a great roundtable. Panelists, again, so on behalf of Céline and I, thank you so much for your time. To the persons who are going to watch this roundtable, thank you for taking the first step to open your ears, first and foremost, because that's the most important step, being open to having the conversation. And if we can keep having conversations like this, the category of rum is going to benefit from your conversation to the next person. So that's what it's about, passing these conversations along. So thank you to everyone for joining us today, and we will see you soon.
Cheers.